The small restaurant sat on the corner of a quiet street, its lights warm and yellow against the evening air. Inside, the soft sound of dishes clinking and gentle chatter filled the space. It was not a fancy place, but it had heart. People came there for comfort, not luxury. The waitstaff knew most customers by name, and they often smiled even when their feet ached from long hours. Among them was a young woman who moved quietly between the tables, carrying trays with care and always speaking politely to everyone. She was not loud or confident, but she worked hard every single day, never complaining. She had started working there 2 years earlier, when life had forced her to give up on something she once loved deeply. Most of her co-workers only knew her as the quiet waitress who stayed late to clean up after everyone else. They did not know much about her life before the restaurant. They only knew she lived alone in a small apartment a few streets away, and came to work even when she was tired or sick. She never shared her troubles or dreams, but behind her calm face lived a story that no one could imagine. In her small apartment, there was an old keyboard that barely worked. Some keys were broken, others out of tune, but every night after work she would sit before it and play. Music had once been her world. As a child, she used to dream of big concert halls and shining lights, but her family's financial problems had crushed those dreams early. When her mother fell ill, she had to leave her music school to take care of her and earn money. Life had turned hard, and music had become a quiet escape instead of a path. Still, she never stopped playing. At the restaurant, there was an upright piano standing in one corner, dusty and forgotten. It had been placed there years ago by the owner, who once hoped to make the restaurant a place for live music. But no one ever used it anymore. Sometimes when the restaurant was empty late at night, she would dust it off and press a few keys, letting the sound fill the quiet room. Those were small, secret moments that no one saw. The other workers sometimes joked about her habit of staring at that piano. They said she probably thought she was a musician or something. She just smiled shyly and said nothing. She didn't want to draw attention. Life had already taught her that dreams often lead to disappointment when you cannot afford them. One evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. The smell of grilled food filled the air, and laughter from a group of wealthy young people echoed near the corner table. Among them sat a man in a suit, confident and full of energy. He was known in the city for his success and his money. He came from a rich family and now owned several businesses. People often recognized him from newspapers and social media posts. Wherever he went, attention followed. He was the kind of man who believed he could buy anything. When he laughed, his friends laughed louder. When he made a joke, everyone nodded in agreement. That night, he and his friends were celebrating a new business deal. They ordered expensive wine, took selfies, and talked about their next luxury trip. The waitress approached their table carefully, holding a tray with drinks. Her hands were steady, but she could feel their eyes on her. One of the men smirked and whispered something that made the others laugh. She ignored it and placed the glasses gently on the table. The man in the suit looked at her with mild curiosity. "You work here every day, don't you?" he asked suddenly. She nodded politely. "Yes, sir," he smiled, a teasing kind of smile. "You must know this place better than anyone." "I suppose so," she said softly. Then his friend pointed to the piano in the corner. "Hey, remember that thing? Does anyone even play it anymore?" The waitress looked toward the piano automatically. "No, not anymore," she said. The rich man leaned back in his chair and laughed. "Maybe you should play it for us then. You look like someone who has soft hands. You must know a tune or two." The group chuckled, thinking it was funny. She froze for a second. She wanted to walk away, but she knew she couldn't. Customers were always right. "I don't think that would be a good idea, sir," she replied gently. "Come on," he said, his tone playful but sharp. "I'll make you a deal. If you can play something that actually sounds decent, I'll double your salary for the month." The restaurant went silent. The other diners looked over, curious. The staff behind the counter exchanged glances. They had never seen anyone challenge her like that. The air grew thick with awkwardness. Her face turned red. "I really can't," he interrupted. "What's the harm? You're a waitress, not a celebrity. Play a few notes. Or maybe you're afraid." The word stung, but she didn't react. She looked at the piano again. It had been a long time since she had played in front of anyone. Still, something in her heart began to stir. Not anger, but something quieter, stronger. Maybe this was a small chance to remind herself of who she once was. After a moment, she nodded slowly. All right. His friends cheered, thinking it would be a funny show. Some took out their phones to record. The waitress walked toward the piano. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the quiet room. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. Dust rose in the air. She pressed one key. It made a dull sound. Then another and another. The keys were out of tune, but still alive. She sat down, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers gently on the keyboard. For a few seconds, she didn't move. Everyone waited, whispering softly. Then the first note filled the room, soft, slow, uncertain. It was almost nothing at first, just a faint melody. But soon her fingers began to move with more confidence. The music grew richer, smoother. The sound filled the restaurant like a warm wave. People who were eating stopped to listen. The waiters stood still. Even the noise from the kitchen seemed to fade away. The tune was full of emotion, sad yet beautiful. The millionaire's laughter stopped. He watched her, eyes fixed on her hands. The woman who had seemed invisible minutes ago now looked different. Focused, graceful, powerful. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone else entirely. She closed her eyes for a moment as the melody rose higher. Every note carried a piece of her past, her lost dreams, her sleepless nights, her quiet hopes. She wasn't playing for money or attention. She was playing because she had to, because the music inside her could no longer stay silent. When she finished, the last note hung in the air for a few seconds before fading away. The room stayed silent. Then slowly people began to clap. At first softly, then louder, until the sound filled the whole restaurant. The waitress stood up, embarrassed but calm. She gave a small nod and stepped away from the piano. Her face was pale but peaceful. The millionaire's friends were speechless. The man who had dared her to play looked like he didn't know what to say. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than before. That was something. She smiled politely. "Thank you, sir," she said, and quietly returned to her work. The rest of the night felt different. The restaurant, once noisy with laughter and chatter, seemed quieter, almost thoughtful. The millionaire sat in silence for a while, watching her move between the tables again. He felt something unfamiliar. Respect. When the group finally left, he placed a large tip on the table, but she didn't even look at it. She was busy helping an old couple find their coats near the door. After closing time, when everyone had gone, she stayed behind to clean as usual. She wiped the tables, swept the floor, and finally turned off the lights one by one. Before leaving, she looked at the piano again. The keys were still dusty, but now it felt different, like it had come alive again, even if only for a few minutes. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys and whispered, "Thank you," as if the instrument could hear her. Walking home under the streetlights, she thought about what had happened. It had been embarrassing at first, but something inside her felt lighter now. For years, she had kept her talent hidden, afraid of judgment, afraid of failure. But tonight, even if it was just for a short time, she had shared a part of herself that she thought was gone forever. At home, she made tea and sat near the old keyboard. She pressed one of its cracked keys and smiled. Her life was still hard, but maybe, just maybe, she hadn't lost everything after all. Across town, the millionaire couldn't sleep either. The image of that quiet waitress sitting at the piano stayed in his mind. He had seen many performances before, from professionals and artists, but none had moved him the way hers did. There was something raw and honest about it. He began to wonder who she really was and what her story might be. He didn't know it yet, but that moment in the small restaurant had started something that would change both their lives forever. The night deepened. The city lights flickered in the distance, and the sound of the piano seemed to echo faintly in memory, a melody that began quietly but refused to fade. The next morning, the city was still waking up when the waitress opened her small window and looked outside. The air smelled fresh after a light rain. Drops still clung to the glass, catching the sunlight. She took a deep breath and tried to shake off the tiredness from the night before. Her mind was still replaying the moment she had played the piano at the restaurant. It felt unreal, almost like a dream. She had not planned to do it. She had not wanted to show anything. But the way people had looked at her after the music stopped, silent, amazed, almost moved, had touched something deep inside her. She made her usual cup of tea and sat at the small table in her kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked softly. For a while, she just sat there thinking. Maybe it didn't mean anything, she told herself. Maybe the people would forget by today. But even as she said that, part of her wished it had meant something. For years she had worked quietly trying to survive, and now a single song had suddenly reminded her of who she really was. She smiled faintly, though she didn't know why, at Sue. The restaurant, everyone was talking about what had happened the night before. The cooks in the kitchen couldn't stop replaying the story. The manager had heard about it from the waiter who filmed part of it on his phone. Even the customers who came in for breakfast were whispering about the waitress who played the piano. When she walked in, they greeted her differently. Some smiled with admiration. Others looked at her with new respect. She tried to act normal, picking up trays and taking orders as usual. But inside, she felt a strange warmth. It wasn't pride exactly, more like relief. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like just another face moving from table to table. Later that afternoon, while she was setting glasses on the counter, the restaurant door opened. She looked up and saw the same man from last night, the millionaire. This time, he was alone. He wasn't laughing or talking loudly like before. He looked different, quieter somehow. His step slowed as he entered, and for a moment he seemed unsure whether he should even be there. The manager recognized him immediately and hurried over. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome back. Would you like your usual table?" He nodded politely. "Yes, thank you." The waitress felt her heartbeat quicken. She didn't expect him to come back. Maybe he had business nearby. Or maybe he just wanted to show he could walk in anywhere and be noticed. She picked up a menu and walked toward his table, keeping her tone calm and professional. "Good afternoon. Would you like something to drink?" He looked up at her with a small smile. "Just water for now." She nodded and walked away, pretending to be busy at the counter. But when she glanced back, she saw him still watching her. He didn't look arrogant like last night. There was something thoughtful in his eyes. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. She froze for a second, not sure what to say. Customers rarely apologize to waiters. "For last night," he continued. "I shouldn't have dared you like that. It was childish. You didn't deserve it." She shook her head gently. "It's all right, sir. You didn't mean any harm." "I did," he said, his voice calm but honest. "I thought it would be funny, but you made me realize something. You were amazing." She felt her face grow warm. "Thank you," she said softly. He leaned forward slightly. "You must have trained somewhere. No one plays like that, without learning." She hesitated, unsure how much to share. "I used to study music a long time ago, but I had to stop when life got hard. Since then, I only play when I can." He nodded slowly. "You shouldn't have to stop. You have real talent. The kind people rarely find." His words sounded sincere, and for the first time she looked directly at him. He wasn't the same loud man from the night before. His voice carried a kind of respect she wasn't used to hearing. When he finished his meal, he stood up and said, "I'm hosting a charity event next month. We raise funds for young artists who lost their chance to study. I'd be honored if you performed there." She stared at him in disbelief. "Perform? Me?" "Yes. People should hear you." "I'm not sure, sir," she said nervously. "I haven't performed in years, and I don't even have proper clothes for something like that." He smiled gently. "Don't worry about that. I can help with everything. Just think about it." She didn't answer right away. It sounded like a dream. Too big, too far from her world. But there was a softness in his voice that made her think he wasn't joking. After he left, the restaurant buzzed again. Everyone wanted to know what he had said. She told no one. She just went back to her work quietly, though her mind was racing. That night, after finishing her shift, she walked slowly home. The streets were quiet, and her thoughts were louder than the traffic. Could she really do something like that? It wasn't just fear. It was disbelief. People like her didn't belong in charity galas or grand hotels. She had spent years serving others, not standing on a stage in front of them. Still, as she walked, She found herself humming the tune she had played the night before. The next few days passed quickly. She tried to push the idea out of her mind, but it kept returning. Whenever she walked past the piano, she felt drawn to it. She started staying late again after everyone else had left, practicing quietly in the dim light. She was careful not to disturb anyone, but sometimes the night guard would pause by the door just to listen. The music was soft, calm, and full of feeling, the kind that spoke straight to the heart. One evening, as she was finishing a song, the restaurant owner came in unexpectedly. He had been locking up when he heard the sound. "That was you playing?" he asked with surprise. She nodded shyly. "Just for a few minutes before going home." He smiled. "You should play when customers are here too. It gives this place life. We could use that again." She didn't know what to say. "Maybe someday," she murmured. By the end of the week, she received a small envelope with her name on it. Inside was a handwritten note. It said, "The invitation still stands. I hope you'll say yes. Dr." There was also a card with the address of a music studio and a contact number. She read the note several times, unsure what to do. Finally, she decided to call. A woman answered and said she worked for the event team. They wanted her to come by to practice and choose a piece for the performance. Everything would be arranged. When she hung up, she sat for a long time, holding the phone in her lap. She could almost hear her heart beating. This could be the beginning of something new, or a mistake she might regret. But deep down, she knew she had to try. The next morning, she took a deep breath and went to the address on the card. The studio was beautiful, full of instruments and soft lighting. The man from the restaurant was already there, talking to a few musicians. When he saw her, he smiled warmly. "I'm glad you came," he said. She nodded nervously. "I wasn't sure I should." "I'm glad you did," he said. "You'll feel at home here." He introduced her to a music coach who would help her prepare for the event. They asked her to play something simple at first, just to see her style. Her hands trembled at the beginning, but as the notes flowed, she forgot her fear. The room fell silent again, just like that night in the restaurant. "When I did coach," she finished. The coach looked at her with admiration. "You don't need much help," he said. "You play from the heart. That's what people remember." The millionaire smiled and said softly, "I told you." She looked down, trying to hide her shy smile. "Thank you," she whispered. They practiced for a few hours. The song they chose was soft and emotional, something that told a story without words. By the time she left the studio, the sun was setting, and the city glowed gold and pink. She walked home slowly, feeling something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Over the next few days, she practiced every evening after work. Her fingers hurt sometimes, but she didn't care. She wanted to be ready. At the restaurant, she still served food and cleaned tables, but now there was a quiet joy in her movements. She had something to look forward to. Sometimes customers asked her about the piano again. One old man who had seen her play said, "You remind me of my daughter. She used to play like that before she passed away. You've got a gift, young lady. Don't let it go." She smiled gently. "I won't," she said. As the day of the event came closer, she began to believe in herself a little more. The millionaire visited the restaurant again once or twice, checking in quietly, never making her feel pressured. He spoke kindly, offering help when needed but never trying to control her. She began to see that maybe he wasn't just a rich man with pride. Maybe he was someone who understood what it meant to lose and start again. On the night before the event, she sat alone at the restaurant's piano one last time. The lights were dim and the chairs were stacked on tables. She touched the keys and closed her eyes. The music that came out was soft and full of emotion, a whisper from the heart. When she finished, she felt calm. She was ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Outside, the wind moved through the quiet streets, carrying faint sounds of the city. Somewhere in that vast world, two people, one rich and one poor, were about to cross paths again in a way that would surprise them both, and change more than just their own lives. The day of the charity event arrived faster than she expected. The morning sky was pale and soft, and the air carried a feeling of change. She woke up early, unable to sleep properly the night before. Her heart was heavy with excitement and fear at the same time. She looked around her small room, the same one she had lived in for years, and smiled faintly. The walls were still cracked, the furniture still old, but for the first time she didn't see it as a cage. It felt like the beginning of something new. She made herself a cup of tea and sat near the window. The streets below were already busy with people rushing to work, buses honking, and vendors setting up their stalls. Everything looked the same, yet inside her, everything had changed. She wasn't just the quiet waitress anymore. Tonight she would stand on a stage under real lights in front of strangers who had no idea who she was. The thought made her nervous, but there was also a small spark of pride in her heart. At the restaurant, her co-workers couldn't stop talking about it. They had found out from the manager, who proudly told everyone that one of their own had been invited to play at a big event, hosted by the same millionaire who had once dared her. Some teased her gently, others wished her luck, but most of them just looked at her with genuine happiness. It wasn't every day that someone from their world got a chance like this. The millionaire's assistant arrived in the afternoon to pick her up for the final rehearsal. They had arranged a car for her, something she had never imagined before. When she stepped outside and saw the sleek black car waiting by the curb, her heart skipped a beat. She felt out of place for a moment, but the driver greeted her kindly and helped her inside. As the car moved through the city, she looked out the window at the tall buildings and crowded streets. Everything felt distant and unreal. She thought about her mother, who had always told her to never give up on music. She wished her mother could see her now, sitting in a car on her way to perform in a hall filled with people. For a moment, she felt tears rise in her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. She didn't want to ruin her simple makeup. When they reached the venue, she couldn't believe what she saw. The building was tall and shining, with large glass doors and bright banners. Inside, the air smelled of flowers and polished wood. People were setting up decorations, arranging seats, and checking lights. The sound crew tested microphones while a few musicians tuned their instruments on stage. The millionaire was there too, standing near the piano talking to the event team. He saw her as soon as she entered and walked over with a smile that felt warm and genuine. "You made it," he said. She nodded, smiling nervously. "Yes, I'm here." He noticed her hands trembling slightly and said softly, "Don't worry. It's not a competition. It's just music, and you already know how to speak through it." His calm tone helped her relax a little. He introduced her to the event organizers, who greeted her respectfully. They had already prepared a simple dress for her performance, elegant but modest in a soft cream color. When she tried it on, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. The dress fit perfectly, and for the first time in many years, she felt beautiful not because of the clothes, but because she felt seen. The rehearsal went smoothly. She played the same piece she had chosen during her earlier practice, one that spoke of longing and hope. The hall was empty, except for a few staff members, but when the last note faded, even they clapped softly. The millionaire watched silently, hands in his pockets, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he said quietly, "That's perfect. Don't change a thing." After the rehearsal, she sat backstage with a cup of water, trying to calm herself. She could hear the faint sounds of people arriving in the hall, voices mixing with laughter and music. The event was starting soon. Guests from all over the city had been invited, business leaders, artists, and families. It was not just a charity night. It was also a celebration of second chances and hidden talent. When it was finally her turn, she felt her legs go weak. The host announced her name, mentioning that she worked at a small restaurant and had been discovered by chance after a simple act of courage. The audience murmured curiously. Some leaned forward, expecting to see a nervous beginner. She walked slowly to the piano. The lights were bright, and for a moment everything seemed too big. The crowd, the stage, the silence. Her heart pounded so hard that she could hear it in her ears. She sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and took a deep breath. Daitio. First few notes were quiet, almost hesitant, but soon the music grew stronger. Her hands moved gracefully, her eyes closed, her mind drifting into the melody. She forgot about the people, the lights, the hall. She played as if she were alone in that small restaurant again, lost in her world. The sound was soft at first, like a whisper, then it built into something deep and emotional. The audience grew silent. Every note carried a story, a life of struggle, patience, and hidden dreams. She didn't need words. The music spoke everything she couldn't say. When the final note hung in the air, the hall remained still for a long moment. Then came the applause, first gentle, then louder, until everyone was standing. People cheered, some even wiping tears from their eyes. The millionaire clapped too, his face glowing with pride. She stood up, bowed shyly, and smiled. Her eyes were shining, not from pride but from relief. She had done it. She had faced her fear and shared a piece of herself with the world. After the performance, people came up to meet her. Some asked about her story, others congratulated her. Reporters took photos, and someone even offered her a chance to play at another event. She was overwhelmed but grateful. The millionaire stayed nearby, making sure she was comfortable and not too crowded. Later, when the event was over and the guests began leaving, she found a quiet corner to breathe. The lights had dimmed, and the hall was nearly empty. She sat down near the stage, holding a small bouquet someone had given her. The millionaire walked over, smiling gently. "You were incredible," he said. "I don't think anyone expected that kind of emotion." She looked up at him. "Thank you for giving me this chance. I never thought I would play like that again." He shook his head. "You didn't need me for that. The music was already in you. I just helped others see it." She smiled softly. "Still, it means more than you know." He paused for a moment, then said quietly, "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That real talent doesn't always wear a suit or live in a big house. Sometimes it's hidden where no one looks." They stood in silence for a while, both lost in thought. Finally, he said, "You know, we're planning another event next month. This one's for young musicians who can't afford lessons. I'd like you to help teach them. You could inspire them the way you inspired everyone tonight." Her eyes widened. "Me? Teach? Who better?" he said with a smile. "You know what it's like to struggle and still keep going. That's what they need, not just skill but heart." She didn't answer right away. The idea scared her a little, but it also made her heart flutter. Teaching others, sharing her love for music, it felt right. "I'll think about it," she said softly. "Good," he replied. "Take your time. You've earned it." As the night ended, he offered to drive her home. She hesitated but agreed. The car ride was quiet at first, the city lights flashing outside the window. Then he spoke again, his tone calm and honest. "You know, when I dared you that night, I thought it would be a joke. But you turned it into something powerful. You changed the way I see people." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes life surprises us," she said. "Sometimes we surprise ourselves." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad I met you." When they reached her street, she thanked him for the ride. Before she got out, he said, "This is only the beginning for you. Don't hide your gift again. Promise me that." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I promise." He smiled, and she stepped out of the car. The night air was cool, carrying the soft hum of distant traffic. She watched the car drive away before walking toward her apartment. The streetlights flickered faintly, and the world seemed quieter than usual. When she reached her door, she sat down by the window and looked up at the stars. She felt tired but peaceful. Her fingers still tingled from playing. She thought of her old piano at home, the one with broken keys, and smiled. That piano had carried her through the hardest years of her life. She whispered to herself, "Maybe this is just the start." The night was silent, and somewhere far away she could almost hear the echo of her own music, soft and full of hope, a reminder that dreams can sleep for years and still wake up again when the right moment comes. When the last note of the piano faded, the restaurant fell into a deep silence. For a few seconds, it felt like even the air had stopped moving. People who were laughing moments ago now stared at the young waitress standing beside the piano. Her hands were still slightly shaking, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. She looked uncertain, unsure if what she had just done was foolish or brave. The entire room stayed quiet until one of the older diners clapped his hands softly, almost like he was afraid to break the magic. Then another person joined, and another, and suddenly the place filled with loud applause. The sound grew stronger, echoing through the small restaurant. People turned in their seats to see who she was. Some even stood up, smiling and cheering. A few of them pulled out their phones to record, wishing they had started earlier. The waitress stood still for a moment, her eyes wide, trying to understand what was happening. She had only played because she didn't want to walk away from the dare, but now it felt like a dream. The young millionaire, who had made the challenge, sat frozen at his table. His friends stared at him with surprise, waiting to see how he would react. He had been so confident earlier, so full of jokes and pride. But now his expression had changed completely. His playful smirk was gone. Instead, he looked at her with disbelief and a hint of respect he couldn't hide. For the first time that evening, he didn't have anything clever to say. One of his friends leaned forward and whispered something, but he didn't respond. He just kept watching the waitress like he was trying to understand how someone so simple, so quiet could play like that. The room, once filled with laughter and noise, now seemed smaller, warmer, more human. It was as if the music had stripped away everyone's pride for a few minutes and reminded them what emotion really felt like. The waitress smiled nervously and stepped back from the piano. She gave a small nod to the audience and quickly returned behind the counter. Her coworkers were waiting for her with wide eyes. One of them whispered, "Where did you learn that?" She smiled softly and said, "It's been a long time." She didn't want to talk much. Her heart was still racing, not from fear anymore, but from a strange joy she hadn't felt in years. The manager, who had been standing near the kitchen, came forward and shook her hand. "That was amazing," he said. "I didn't know you could play like that." She just smiled again, trying not to make a big deal out of it. The applause continued for a while, and when it finally faded, people began to return to their food. But the energy in the room had changed completely. It was warmer, kinder, almost filled with admiration. The young millionaire finally stood up. He walked slowly toward the counter. Everyone's eyes followed him. His friends whispered and laughed softly, not sure what he would say. The waitress looked up, surprised to see him approaching. He stopped in front of her, still looking slightly embarrassed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "That was unbelievable." She smiled politely and replied, "Thank you." He cleared his throat and added, "I guess I owe you that bonus I promised." She shook her head quickly and said, "You don't owe me anything, it was just a song." He looked at her in disbelief and said, "Just a song? You made a whole restaurant stop breathing. That wasn't just a song." His tone had softened, losing the arrogance he had earlier. It was the first time that night he spoke with real sincerity. She didn't know how to respond, so she just thanked him again and went back to work. But inside, she felt lighter. The fear and embarrassment she had carried at the start of the evening had turned into quiet pride. People still came to her table later just to say how beautiful the music was. Some even asked her if she had ever played in concerts. Each time she smiled and said, "No, I just learned when I was younger." When the night ended and the restaurant emptied out, she stayed behind to clean the tables. The young millionaire and his friends had already left, but there was a folded note and a generous tip on the table where they had sat. The note said only a few words. "You have a gift, don't hide it again." She read it twice and put it in her pocket. She wasn't used to compliments like that, but it made her heart warm. Outside, the streets were quiet. She walked home slowly, replaying everything that had happened. It felt unreal, like something out of a story. The sound of the applause still echoed in her head. She smiled to herself, thinking maybe it was time to believe in her music again. The next morning, she woke up early as usual. She didn't expect anything to change, but deep inside she felt a new energy. When she arrived at the restaurant, her coworkers were still talking about last night. Someone had uploaded a small video clip of her performance online, and it was already getting attention. People were commenting things like, "She plays with her heart," and "This is real talent." She didn't even know who recorded it, but the thought made her blush. By afternoon, the restaurant had more customers than usual. Many people came after hearing about the waitress who played the piano. Some even asked her if she would play again. She laughed shyly and said, "Maybe later." The manager smiled, clearly proud of her. "Looks like you brought us more business than all my posters," he joked. While she was busy serving, she noticed a familiar face at the corner table. The young millionaire had returned. This time he was alone. No loud friends, no fancy clothes. Just a simple shirt and a thoughtful expression. She walked over and asked, "Would you like to order something?" He smiled and said, "Coffee, and maybe a song later if you don't mind." She smiled softly but didn't answer. She brought him his coffee, and for a while he just sat there watching her move around the room, serving people, smiling, working quietly. It was clear he saw her differently now. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone with grace and strength he couldn't fake with money. After some time, he called her over. "I wanted to say sorry," he said, "for how I acted last night. I didn't mean to be rude." She looked surprised but smiled kindly. "It's fine," she said. "People joke around all the time." He shook his head. "No, it's not fine. You didn't deserve that. You taught me something." She didn't quite know what to say. "What did I teach you?" she asked softly. He smiled and said, "That real talent doesn't wear a suit. It just waits quietly until someone gives it a chance." Those words stayed with her. They sounded simple, but she could feel they came from the heart. He asked her a few more questions about her life, about where she learned to play, and if she still practiced. She told him she used to go to a small music school when she was younger, but had to stop when her mother got sick. Since then, she had been working to support herself, playing only when she could find time. He listened carefully, not interrupting once. When she finished, he said, "You should never stop. You were born for it." She laughed lightly and said, "It's too late now, I'm just a waitress." He shook his head. "No, it's not too late. Some people wait their whole life to find what you already have." The conversation ended when more customers arrived. She went back to work, but his words stayed in her mind for the rest of the day. When she got home that night, she sat by the window and thought about everything. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. Maybe that night wasn't just a lucky moment. Maybe it was a new beginning she didn't see coming. The next few days he kept visiting the restaurant. Sometimes he came alone, sometimes with business partners. But every time he made sure to say hello and talk for a few minutes. The other staff started whispering about it, teasing her gently, but she didn't pay attention. He never acted like before. No arrogance, no jokes. Just genuine interest. One evening, after most of the customers had left, he asked if she would consider playing at a charity event his company was hosting. She was surprised and nervous. "I don't know if I can," she said. "It's been years since I played for people." He smiled reassuringly and said, "You already did, and you moved an entire room. I think you can do it again." She hesitated for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'll try." That night, when she got home, she sat down at the small keyboard she had borrowed years ago. It was old. Some keys didn't even work properly, but she played anyway. The music filled the tiny apartment, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was practicing. She felt like she was breathing again. Somewhere deep inside, she knew life was about to change, though she didn't know how yet. But one thing was clear. The moment she touched those piano keys in the restaurant, something inside her had woken up again. Something that had been asleep for far too long, and as for the young millionaire, he too couldn't forget that night. The look on her face when she played, the way the crowd reacted, the way he felt small for mocking her. It stayed with him. He didn't know it yet, but that simple dare had started something neither of them could have expected, something that was going to change both their lives forever. The following morning, the waitress woke up earlier than usual. The sunlight slipped through the small window beside her bed, and for the first time in a long while she didn't feel tired getting up. She had been thinking about what the young millionaire said the previous night, about the charity event and his offer. Part of her still couldn't believe he meant it. People like him didn't usually remember promises made to ordinary people, like her. But deep inside, something told her he was serious this time. As she prepared for work, she kept thinking about the idea of playing again. She hadn't stood on a real stage in years. She wasn't sure if she was good enough anymore. But whenever she remembered the way the people clapped in the restaurant, she felt a small spark of courage. Maybe she could do it. Maybe life was finally giving her a second chance. When she reached the restaurant, her co-workers greeted her with teasing smiles. One of them said, "Looks like your rich friend is coming again today." She blushed and shook her head. "He's not my friend," she said quietly. "He's just a customer." But the truth was, she knew he wasn't just another customer anymore. His words had stayed with her, and even though she tried not to think too much, she couldn't help it. By the afternoon, he arrived again, just like they said. This time he brought a folder with him. He sat at his usual corner and waved her over. She walked toward him, wiping her hands on her apron, trying to stay calm. "You really came back," she said with a small smile. He smiled too and replied, "I told you I would." He handed her the folder and said, "This is the invitation to our charity gala next month. It's for a children's hospital. We hold it every year. I'd like you to play there." She opened the folder slowly, looking at the elegant paper inside. Her name was printed in simple letters under the words guest. Performer. Her heart started racing. "I don't know if I can do this," she said softly. "That night here was different. This is something else." He nodded and said, "I know, but I also know you're the right person for it. You don't have to decide now. Think about it." She looked up at him. His eyes were calm, not pushing her, not pretending. For a moment she felt safe. She nodded slowly and said, "All right. I'll think about it." He smiled gently and said, "That's all I ask." The rest of the day went by like a blur. Every time she passed the piano in the corner, she looked at it a little longer. That night after the restaurant closed, she sat down and touched the keys. The sound was slightly off, but it still made her heart warm. She started to play a soft tune, something she remembered from her music school days. Her fingers were stiff at first, but soon they began to move freely again. The music filled the quiet room, and she forgot about everything else. Days turned into weeks. Every night after work, she practiced. She didn't tell anyone at first, but her co-workers began to notice she stayed late. Sometimes they would peek through the kitchen door and see her at the piano, lost in the sound. The manager didn't stop her. He knew something important was happening. One evening, the young millionaire came again. The restaurant was nearly empty. He walked in quietly and saw her at the piano. She didn't notice him until she finished the song. When she turned around and saw him, she blushed and said, "I was just practicing." He smiled softly. "I know. You play differently now," he said. "There's more confidence in it." She laughed nervously. "Maybe it's because I'm getting used to the sound again." He sat down near the piano and listened as she played another tune. When she finished, he said, "You know, I used to think success was about how much money you made or how big your company was. But when you played that night, I realized I never felt what you made people feel. You reminded me what passion looks like." His voice was calm, almost thoughtful. She didn't know what to say, so she simply said, "Everyone has their own way of feeling alive." He looked at her for a moment, then smiled and said, "Maybe, but I'd rather feel alive like this." When he left that night, she felt something change inside her. It wasn't just about the charity event anymore, it was about herself, her music, her dream, the part of her she had buried under years of hard work and quiet living. She wanted to believe she could still bring something beautiful into the world. The next few weeks went by quickly. She practiced every night, sometimes at the restaurant, sometimes at a small hall she rented near her apartment. Her fingers grew stronger, her confidence steadier. The manager even brought in a local music teacher one evening to listen. The teacher, an old man with kind eyes, told her, "You don't just play notes. You tell stories. Don't ever lose that." Those words stayed with her. The day of the charity event arrived sooner than she expected. The gala was being held at a large hotel ballroom. She had never been in a place like that before. The chandeliers sparkled. People in expensive clothes moved around and soft music played in the background. She felt out of place in her simple dress, but the young millionaire greeted her at the entrance and smiled warmly. "You look perfect," he said. "Don't worry, just be yourself." He introduced her to some of his business partners and guests. Most of them were polite, though a few seemed curious why he had chosen a waitress as a performer. But he didn't care about their looks. He believed in her. When the time came, he led her toward the piano set up at the front of the room. She could feel her heart pounding as she sat down. The crowd's chatter faded slowly. She took a deep breath and began to play. At first, her hands trembled slightly, but as the melody grew, she forgot about the people watching. The music filled the hall like sunlight through glass. The notes rose and fell like waves, soft and powerful at once. She could feel every emotion she had kept inside, the pain of her past, the hope she had rebuilt, the joy she found in the music again, all pouring out through her fingers. When she finished, there was silence again, just like that first night in the restaurant. And then, the applause came, louder than ever before. People stood up, clapping, smiling, some even cheering. She looked around, overwhelmed, tears forming in her eyes. She saw the young millionaire standing at the edge of the crowd, clapping, with a proud smile on his face. After the event, many people came to talk to her. Some asked where she had studied. Others asked if she gave lessons or would perform at other events. She didn't know how to answer. All she could say was, "I just love playing." The organizer of the event approached her too and said, "You brought something special tonight. The way you play touches people. You should keep doing this." The young millionaire joined her a little later, handing her a glass of water. "You did it," he said softly. "I told you you were meant for this." She smiled through her tears. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said. He shook his head. "You don't have to. Just promise me one thing. Never stop playing again." She nodded slowly, feeling the truth in his words. That night, when she returned home, she placed the program from the gala on her small table and stared at it for a long time. It was the proof that she had made it back to where she belonged. For years, she had believed her dream was over, but life, in its quiet way, had brought it back. The next morning, she woke up to messages from people she didn't even know. The video of her performance from the gala had already spread online. People were writing things like, "Her music speaks to the heart," and "This is what real talent sounds like." She didn't know how to react. She just smiled, realizing how powerful a simple song could be. Later that day, she received a call from a small recording studio. They had seen her video and wanted her to come and record a few pieces. It wasn't a big company, but it was something, a start. She couldn't stop smiling. It felt like everything she had lost was slowly coming back. That evening, when the young millionaire came to the restaurant again, she showed him the message. He smiled wide and said, "See, the world finally gets to hear what I heard that night." She looked down shyly. "It still feels unreal," she said. He replied, "Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we don't plan." They sat in silence for a moment, just smiling at each other. There were no fancy words, no big promises, just quiet understanding. She knew her life was changing, but she also knew she would never forget where it started, with a dare, a piano, and a moment that no one expected. That night after he left, she stayed behind again. The restaurant was empty, the lights low. She sat at the piano and began to play softly, smiling to herself. The notes floated through the air, gentle and full of life. It wasn't for an audience this time. It wasn't for money or fame. It was for her, for the part of her that had once been lost but now felt alive again. As the last note faded, she whispered softly to herself, "Maybe this was always meant to happen." She closed her eyes, took a deep breath and smiled. For the first time in years, her dream no longer felt far away. It was right there, in her hands, waiting for her to keep playing. The weeks after the charity event felt like a new beginning. The waitress, who once played the piano only in secret, was now slowly becoming known as the girl who made a whole room fall silent. Her video had spread beyond what she ever imagined. People from different places sent kind messages saying how her music reminded them of hope, love, and second chances. Every time she read those words, her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe something so simple, her sitting at a piano, could reach so many hearts. At the restaurant, things changed too. More people started coming in, hoping to see her play. The manager placed a small sign near the piano that said, "Live music by our own star, every Friday evening." The first night she saw that sign, she laughed shyly and tried to take it down, but he stopped her. "You earned it," he said. "Let them hear what I've heard every night after closing." The Friday evening came, and the restaurant filled, up faster than ever. Families, couples, even strangers who had only read about her online came to listen. She sat at the piano, her hands resting gently on the keys, and when she began to play, the whole place grew quiet again. It was as if time itself slowed. The people didn't see a waitress anymore. They saw someone who had poured her heart into the music, someone who had turned pain into beauty. When she finished, people stood up, clapping, smiling, some even with tears in their eyes. She looked around the room and felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. It wasn't about fame or attention. It was about knowing that her music mattered. After everyone left that night, she sat alone for a while, staring at the piano. The young millionaire had come too, sitting quietly in the back of the restaurant watching her perform. When the crowd cleared, he walked over to her table. "You were amazing," he said softly. "Every time I think I've heard your best, you surprise me again." She smiled and said, "I just play what I feel." He nodded slowly, watching her with thoughtful eyes. "You know," he said, "when I first met you, I thought I was the one in control of everything. I had money, power, respect. But you showed me something I didn't know I was missing." She looked at him curiously. "What's that?" He smiled faintly and said, "Heart." She laughed gently and said, "You already had that, you just didn't see it." They sat in silence for a moment. Then he said, "There's something I want to ask you. I want to help you record your own album. Not for business, not for money, just because the world needs to hear what you have." She was speechless for a moment. "I don't even know where to start," she said softly. "I've never done something like that." He smiled and said, "Then we'll learn together. I'll take care of everything. You just focus on your music." The following weeks were busy and full of excitement. They visited a small studio in the city, met a sound engineer, and started recording her first few songs. The sound engineer couldn't believe her story. "You've got something real," he told her. "People can feel what you play, don't ever lose that." She spent hours in the studio playing until her fingers hurt, but she didn't complain. Every note felt like a piece of her journey, the loneliness, the struggle, the rediscovery of her dream. Sometimes when she played, she would close her eyes and remember her mother's face, the small piano at her childhood home, the sound of laughter that once filled those rooms. She carried all of it in her music. The young millionaire often sat quietly in the studio listening. He never gave orders or advice, he just watched, almost in awe, as she created something that no amount of money could buy. For him, it wasn't about business anymore. It was about purpose. Watching her reminded him what real meaning looked like, in something beyond success or luxury. One evening, after a long recording session, they stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights sparkled in the distance. She looked up and said softly, "I still don't understand why you did all this for me." He smiled and said, "Maybe I just needed to believe in something pure again. You gave me that." She looked at him and said, "You gave me back my dream." Their friendship grew quietly, built not on big promises but on shared respect. He never treated her like someone beneath him anymore. He treated her like an equal, someone whose talent could move mountains. And she never saw him as just a rich man again. She saw him as the person who had given her the courage to stand up and try once more. Months passed and her first small album was released. It wasn't with a big company, but it didn't matter. The songs reached people. They streamed them, shared them, and sent her messages saying how her music helped them during hard times. One track, recorded live from the restaurant piano, became especially popular. It was simple, honest, and full of heart. The same song she had played the night she was dared to perform. One afternoon, she sat in the restaurant, now quieter between rush hours, and thought about how far she had come. The same piano that once made her nervous now stood proudly near the window, polished and loved. The same place that once felt like a cage had become her stage. She smiled to herself, realizing that life sometimes leads you in circles just to bring you back home, only stronger. The young millionaire came in later that day holding a small bouquet of white flowers. "These are for the new star of the city," he joked, handing them to her. She laughed softly. "I don't think I'm a star," she said. "I'm just lucky." He looked at her kindly and said, "No, you're not lucky. You're brave. You took a chance when everyone was watching and didn't hide who you were. That's what makes you shine." They sat together for a while, talking about simple things, music, life, how unpredictable everything was. Neither of them needed to say much. The silence between them was comfortable, like they understood each other without words. Later that night, when she finished her shift, she walked home slowly. The streets were quiet, and the air was cool. She carried the flowers in her hands and thought about the journey, from being a quiet waitress who hid her talent to someone who inspired others. She realized that all it took was one moment of courage, one chance she decided not to walk away from. When she reached home, she placed the flowers on her small table beside the old keyboard she used to practice on. She sat down and began to play a soft tune. The melody filled her tiny apartment, gentle and full of warmth. She closed her eyes and smiled, feeling completely at peace. In the following months, her life continued to grow in quiet, beautiful ways. She started teaching music to children at a local center on weekends. She told them, "Don't be afraid to share what you love, even if people don't understand it yet." The children adored her. They called her their music lady. The young millionaire continued his business life, but often came to watch her classes. Sometimes he would sit in the corner and listen to the kids play, smiling quietly. He told her once, "You've changed more lives than you realize." She replied softly, "So have you, just in a different way." They became each other's constant support. He sponsored more community events for young artists, inspired by her story. She played at those events, encouraging others to follow their dreams. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about giving back, sharing the same kindness that had changed her life. One evening, a reporter from a local news channel came to the restaurant to interview her. The story aired a few days later, showing clips of her performance and telling the world about the night when a millionaire dared a waitress to play the piano, and how that one moment changed everything. People loved the story. They said it gave them hope that goodness and talent could still shine in unexpected places. Months later, she was invited to perform at a national music festival. It was her biggest stage yet. When she stepped onto the stage, she felt nervous again, but then she saw him in the front row, smiling up at her, and all the fear disappeared. She played her heart out, every note filled with gratitude and love. The crowd rose to their feet at the end, cheering loudly. After the show, As she walked off the stage, she found him waiting backstage. He looked at her with pride and said, "You did it again." She smiled, eyes shining, and said, "We did it." That night, as they left the concert hall, she looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't just for the applause or success. It was for the journey, for the people who believed in her, and for the second chance life had given her. From that day on, her story became a symbol of hope. People remembered how one small dare had led to a chain of moments that changed two lives. She continued to play, to teach, and to inspire. And every time she sat at the piano, she remembered the night when everything began, the night she stopped being afraid to be seen. Years later, when she played her final concert before retiring, she looked out at the crowd and smiled. In the front row sat the same man who once challenged her in a noisy restaurant. Their eyes met, and they both knew. That moment had started everything. She pressed the final key softly, and as the sound faded, the audience rose in thunderous applause. She stood, bowed slightly, and smiled. Her journey had come full circle, and her heart was finally at peace.